I'm Vic Myers. Welcome to the Resistance. You know, before we had our first president, we had printers. They printed newspapers, pamphlets, essays, things like Common Sense by Thomas Paine, and the Federalist Papers by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. These were the foundational documents that built support for the Revolution and led to the ratification of the Constitution. That's why the founders protected speech and the press in the very First Amendment. They weren't just protecting opinions. They were protecting the tools that gave birth to this country. When our founders drafted the First Amendment, they didn't leave it open to interpretation. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. No law, no exceptions, no government minders in the newsroom. Thomas Jefferson said it best. He said, if it were left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. He wasn't being cute. He was warning us. Because even after we wrote those freedoms down, we didn't always live up to them. In 1798, just years after ratifying the First Amendment, Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, making it a crime to criticize the government. In 1917, they did it again, passing the Espionage Act to silence dissent during World War I. One of the most famous free speech cases in our history was Schenck versus the United States. Charles Schenck was arrested for handing out leaflets opposing the draft. The Supreme Court upheld the conviction, and the opinion was written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., the man who would become one of our strongest defenders of the First Amendment, helped gut it in 1919. He wrote that famous line, "You can't shout fire in a crowded theater." That was his justification for putting a man in prison for speaking his mind. But just months later, Holmes changed course. In a case called Abrams v. United States, he wrote a fierce dissent, arguing that truth must be tested in the marketplace of ideas, that the best answer to bad speech is more speech, not less. That's how a free press is supposed to be. No government oversight, no speech police, which brings us to now. As part of a settlement between Paramount and the federal government, CBS will be required to accept a government-appointed compliance monitor inside the company. They're calling it a political non-discrimination monitor. But let's be clear, this is not about preventing citizenship. This is about enforcing loyalty. It's not about rooting out bias. It's planting it. The same politicians who rant about government overreach just approved a policy to embed a political operative inside a newsroom. Now, if you've read Orwell, you already know where this leads. And if you haven't read Orwell 1984, you might not want to, because it'll scare the hell out of you. In Hungary, Viktor Orban's government took over public media with hand-picked loyalists. In Russia, journalists who challenged the Kremlin found themselves arrested, exiled, or worse. Now it's CBS. Who's next? Your local paper? Your favorite podcast? The public radio station in your town? Oh, wait. They already got that one. This isn't about balance. It's about control. We were warned about this by Jefferson, by Holmes, by Orwell, by every dissenter who's ever been punished for telling the truth. This isn't a culture war. This is a constitutional crisis, one that the press can't tell us about with government compliance officers in the newsroom. Once the government decides what the news should say, it's not news anymore. It's propaganda. And if we let that happen, they won't need to silence dissent, because there won't be any left. Thanks for listening. Good day.
Change my program once again.
Comfortable. But I gotta get up anyway.
You want help? She doesn't want out. She just wants love.